died my soul to save. My lips shall still repeat. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow.
Thank you, Jesus. Amen.
Little slice of heaven right there, hearing you all sing. That's beautiful. We're in a series in the book of Revelation, not in the book of Revelation, that was last year. The book of Romans, right? Wake up. We're in chapter 12 today, so if you've got a Bible or a mobile device, you can turn there. We've been looking at this theme of spiritual formation, and that's the work of the Holy Spirit making us like Jesus, us partnering with him, posturing ourselves for growth. And we as a church want to pursue Christ-likeness. We want to look like Jesus to everyone we encounter. And I'm so thankful that we get to do this journey together as family. Can you remember a time when you went to some place that was brand new for the very first time? Like starting a new middle school or at a new high school. What were those feelings like? Wanting to feel accepted, wanting to feel belonging, not wanting to be bullied or teased. How about like the brave endeavor of trying a new church? A whole bunch of people you don't know. Trying to figure out what's going on here. Do these people have the same values that I do? Will I fit in? Will my family be welcome? Some of these people seem crazy. What about moving to a new neighborhood? How long did it take you to have your neighbors over for dinner? Or how long was it before they reached out to you and invited you to be a part of their community? I remember distinctly two situations growing up, one in 6th grade and one in 10th grade, both that had to do with belonging. And in 6th grade, I transitioned. 5th grade, I had been homeschooled, so I transitioned to a charter school in 6th grade. So this was my first time around other students in the classroom, and we were assigned seats. And I remember who I thought was the prettiest girl in the class at the time. Nicole Roosevelt was her name. And she was assigned a seat right next to mine. Hot dog, right? And I remember she grabbed her books and she rolled her eyes, and I heard her mutter under her breath, "Look who I have to sit next to." And it killed me as a 6th grader. And that began for me one of like my lifelong wounds of wanting to feel belonging and acceptance and not finding it on the peer-to-peer basis. Fast forward to 10th grade. My family and I were church shopping, looking for a place to call home. Isn't that fun? So we try these different churches, and I remember one big church we went into, not one person noticed that we were there because we were a small cog in a large sea of faces. We ended up going to a church called Trinity Alliance Church, Redding, California. And I remember we walked in the door, a boy named Andy Lund saw me, ran up to me, grabbed my hand, and said, "Hey, I'm Andy. I want to introduce you to my parents. I'm going to introduce you to the youth pastor and the entire youth group." So I met basically like half the church that morning. And I remember telling my parents when we got in the car, "Can we go back there?" Because I experienced belonging. I experienced acceptance, and I experienced what it looked like to be brought into a family. So two situations. One, I felt ostracized, and one, I felt belonging. When we all experience, trying something for the first time, whether it's joining a new sports team, a club, a music group, going to college, getting a new job, but whatever it is, we all want the same thing, besides money. We all want to experience belonging. When people join a new church, what is it they want? To feel a part of the family, to be included, accepted, noticed, cared for. All of us want that. Why is that? We were made for family. We were made to experience belonging. We were made for community, acceptance. God designed it that way on purpose. So we've been going through the book of Romans, not Revelation. And in Romans 12, verse 13, Paul writes this: contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. He says, I want you to be aware of the needs of the people around you and put into practice this ideal called hospitality. Hospitality is the idea that everyone is included in your family. Hospitality is one person showing another person you are cared for, you belong. Paul writes this to a church in Rome because the Roman culture is anything but hospitable. Women and children are treated as property. It's a caste system where it's extremely difficult to move up in society. But Paul, being both a Roman and a Jew, he knows the history of God's people and knows that God wanted his people to model this to every other nation. For the Jews, this was not a new thought. Paul knows that hospitality is an attribute of God. God creates belonging, creates family, and Paul wants to invite the church to emulate that aspect of God's character. So in Old Testament times, hospitality in the ancient world, it focused on alienated persons, the traveler who often needed immediate food or lodging. It focused on widows, on orphans, on the poor, sojourners in other lands who lacked family or community, and they needed a means to live. They needed protection. And we see from the book of Genesis all the way through Deuteronomy and books like Ruth and Samuel that acts of hospitality included the reception of travelers into one's home, giving food, lodging, protection, permitting a person to harvest the corners of one's field, clothing the naked, tithing food for the needy, and even including foreigners in religious celebrations. So, in fact, when you read the whole of the Bible looking for the theme of hospitality, you see it everywhere. God commanded the Hebrews to remember their own exile in Egypt and allowed that to motivate them to remember foreigners. In Leviticus 19, God says, you shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 26, when you have finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce that year, that tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. So a tenth of their food that year was set aside for the priests, the foreigners, the orphans, and the widows. That's how God told his people to use their resources. In the New Testament, Peter writes, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. He's saying it's also a posture. It's an attitude one adopts. Hebrews 12, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Who knows what can happen when you care for someone? So when Paul says, seek to show hospitality, he's talking about a posture here. Christ has hosted us well, given us family. Now we get to host other people well. Christ has let us be a part of a global family and a local one. He has hosted us well, so we endeavor to do the same. And never is something so biblical, also in some ways so anti-American. Because in America, we value individualism. We value going about it by our own, not asking for help, pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, as the saying goes, taking care of our needs first. We had new neighbors move in to the rental on our right just a few months ago. I met the dad, and he said, I've got a 12-year-old daughter. And I said, or 11, 10, thank you. And I was like, well, I've got a 12-year-old daughter. And so I told Jenna the other day, how about you go, introduce yourself to this girl? We hadn't seen her yet. Go knock on the door. Here I am, I should have done it myself, but I'm making my daughter do it. Make her feel welcome to the neighborhood. So Jenna goes out there, brave girl, knocks on the door. This girl's name is Haley, and then suddenly they're fast friends, and they hang out all the time. They're going for walks to Starbucks together and Baskin Robbins the other day. It's absolutely beautiful to watch. But imagine starting in a neighborhood new for the first time. It's really hard to get to know people, especially if you're the one who has to initiate it. But how much easier when people initiate it with you. And our upbringing shows something really fascinating. Some of us grew up having people over in our homes all the time. I was raised in a household where people were always over at our house, at least 2 or 3 times a week. That was just normal. And my kids are raised in that environment, and they think that's normal. But every household is different. I remember a gal, part of our church up in Washington, we were talking about forming these community groups that would have every demographic in them. And she was saying, I will not have kids in my house because my house isn't set up for kids. And she kind of drew a line in the sand, and I thought, that's really interesting. I think that's okay, but at the same time, I wonder if we limit what God can do in us because we draw lines in the sand with regards to who can come to our home. I want my friend Christina to come share a little bit of her story. She and Dwayne are people that I respect tremendously, and I want you to hear a little bit of their hospitality story.
Good morning. I don't know if I'd say raised, but like Caleb's talking about how you were raised affects you. For me, growing up, we didn't really have people come over very often. And if we did, it meant a day of cleaning so that the house was perfect before anyone came over. And then people would come over and do whatever we were going to do, and then they'd leave. There was usually in our brains probably a time limit of how welcome those people were probably at our home. And it's just the way that it was. It wasn't good or bad, it's just how I grew up. My husband, on the other hand, he grew up living with his grandparents for a lot of his younger years, and his grandfather was a pastor, and they lived in a very small home, and their doors were always open. They always had people over. They didn't have a lot to share, but they always shared. And so when you join together in marriage, two very different people, you learn a lot about each other really quick. And I quickly learned that we had very different ideas of what it meant to be hospitable. I thought it meant presenting a very perfect looking house that people would come into clean. And he thought it meant having an open door policy. And it took a lot of discussion between us for me to realize that perfectionism is an enemy to hospitality. And that was really hard for me to recognize because that was me having to change. I don't know if you've ever done these personality tests or even God, what are those, what are the Enneagram? Those Enneagram and also the your spiritual gifts tests, things like that. Well, on mine, hospitality was way down here. I did not score well on those tests. So I thought, well, it's just not my gifting. But about 8 years ago or so, Dwayne and I, the more we talked about, this was something God really called him to, and he does it well. He does it without even have to think about it. It's just a natural attribute for him. For me, it was not. And so it really took me spending time with God and figuring out, God and my husband, talking through this, figuring out what does that look like? What does hospitality look like in our lives? For me, it meant learning to let go of what I thought was a welcoming environment. Clean, perfect houses don't necessarily mean welcoming. I can tell you a specific time one time when we had a bunch of people over, and after the fact, I apparently hadn't done very well being hospitable, but I thought I did. But Dwayne let me know, he goes, you realize you were cleaning up people's glasses while they were still holding them. I will never forget that, because to me, in my mind, I was being a good hostess, but on the other end, you have to learn what is creating a welcoming environment. So throughout the years, God's really, really worked on me to learn that an open door policy in our family is best. It's way harder. It's way messier. it's way more, it requires so much more of me. A clean house doesn't really require much. An open heart and an open home requires a lot. It requires a lot of transparency. It requires a lot of living in your own mess and allowing others into that mess. And not just house mess, life mess. But in those moments, that's where community and connection is made. I remember about 6-7 years ago, there was a gal that Dwayne was working with who was part of the college group at another church we're a part of, whose family lives in Southern California. And he said, I think we should invite her over for Christmas. She's by herself. And to me, that was really disruptive to what I thought Christmas looked like. But here was this girl with no one, and she came over, and she spent Christmas morning with us, and Christmas afternoon, and Christmas night. And it was such a stretch for me. I'm just letting you know, like, the honesty of it. That was such a stretch for me, and yet that day changed me, because she felt welcome to stay. And even though I hadn't grown up that way, or it wasn't a learned thing that someone taught me how to do, it's a learned thing by practicing. In my version of this verse, it says practice hospitality, because it takes practice. So over the years, over the past 7, 8 years, Dwayne and I have really worked hard on having an open door policy for our house. We have people over, we've had people live on our property with us, even the shed. And it has changed me from the inside out. I've learned that hospitality is not creating an environment. It's not just creating an environment where people feel welcome. It's allowing God to create a space in my heart where people feel welcome.
Thanks, Christina. That's awesome. Hospitality is not about showing off your house. As she said, your decorating skills, even your fantastic cooking abilities. It's about showing other people that they're cared for, that they belong. Kids, how do you practice this? At your schools, are there people who feel like they don't belong? What can you do about that? What about your neighbors? Have you met them? Invited them over? Young adults. Everyone is looking to be a part of the in crowd. Well, I dub thee, you're in. Now invite others into that in to be with you. Parents, how do you show hospitality to your kids or grandkids? How do you demonstrate to them that they belong, that they're part of family? Like Becky said, we were sick over Christmas break. It was the pits. After we left Shingletown, we came home, and a member of our church family, they texted us to check in on us. And then they showed up at our house. We heard a knock at the door, and they left chicken noodle soup on our doorstep. We felt so cared for and so loved. We felt belonging in that gesture. We experienced hospitality. Hospitality goes beyond inviting someone over for a meal. It's an attitude. It's a posture we take on. Do you know your page on Facebook or on Instagram, if you're younger, represents your hospitality? These are platforms for connection, correct? And we want people to feel like they know us in those mediums. When people visit your page or read your comments, do they feel belonging? Do they feel loved and taken in, made a part of something? Or do they feel antagonized, attacked? Often what we post can create the opposite effect of hospitality. You're different from my way of thinking. I ostracize you. Expelliarmus. Unfortunately, we rely too heavily on social media for our connections with others. And we're physical beings, and true connection doesn't happen well, or in some cases at all, over mobile devices. I remember years ago being invited over to a man's home up in Paradise, and I call it a home, but he lived in a 21-foot camper in a trailer park. And I walked in, and I immediately thought, where on earth am I going to sit? Because this man had all his belongings and possessions just scattered everywhere, and there was literally no place. I just made it in the door and thought, this is as far as I can go. And we ended up piling some magazines down in the walkway to the bedroom where both of us could sit. And he did the same. And the most beautiful time, and the most beautiful part about that time, was that he didn't feel embarrassed that this was his home. We sat there on these magazines and we shared our stories with each other, how we had, come to Jesus. And it was one of those holy moments where you sense God is honored in this meeting. He just wanted to have a person over into his home to see the real him. And I got to see the real him, and he got to see the real me. And it was absolutely beautiful. We don't have to be all put together for someone to experience our lives. In fact, it's better perhaps not to be all put together. That way people can see the real us. If you know the real me, the real Caleb, you're put way more at ease, because Caleb is such a nerd. He's such a dork. And frankly, I like that Caleb better than the professional. How do we do hospitality during this pandemic? I hear you asking. Great question. The answer is creatively. We are the children of God, and He is a creative Father. He is the author of creativity. And yes, the season of life takes more work for all of us, but that's okay. Because we're not just inviting people into our homes. We are taking care of. Going outside of our homes to show care. Bringing a meal to a sick family. Visiting a shut-in. Standing outside and waving through a window. Meeting with people outside. COVID is not going to last forever. I want an amen for that, right? No one agrees with me. Are we alive? And I just want to say kudos to our church family for doing this and being this. You guys have stepped up to the plate in this regard. You've taken so many meals, purchased groceries, and checked on people who are not doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing that. You've been meeting in each other's homes. You've been creating safe places where we can be ourselves. Good on you for that. We often join churches based on how welcoming they are to us. And we can often think, I wonder who will reach out and make me feel welcome today. But do we ever think, I wonder who I can reach out to make feel welcome today? That is the heart of hospitality. It's a mental shift. The desire for others to experience belonging. I love Henry Nouwen as an author. He writes in his book, Reaching Out, hospitality means primarily the creation of free space, Christina mentioned this, where a stranger can enter in and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place. It is not to bring men and women over to our side and our thinking, but to offer freedom not to be disturbed by dividing lines. When we engage in hospitality, it creates an opportunity where we are able to recognize the injustices that our neighbors face. It puts us in their shoes, not a time for us to change them, but inviting them in to hear their story, and maybe we will be the ones that will be changed. So how is this developed in us? How do we grow in hospitality? I would say first, start by learning people's names. Names are the window into the soul. Instead of, hey, you, good to see you, guy. Hey, champ, learn someone's names, because a story goes with that name. We're so much deeper when we know and can call out that name. Second, maybe choose a person or a family to invite over for dinner once a week just to get to know them. Keep your eyes open for families with needs. If you hear of someone sick, what can you do? Financial trouble, car problems, opportunities for hospitality. Maybe if you're on Facebook or Instagram, read that through the eyes of looking for needs instead of envying other people's lives or stuff. Don't be a problem fixer, though. We hate people who are just like jump in and like, I'm just a project to you, right? No, just be available. Make yourself available. Maybe initiate a get-together with two families. Host them at your house once or twice a month. Maybe identify a demographic in our church family, kids, or your kids' sports or drama team, and find a way to be present in their lives. Maybe all we can do is text or call because mobility is hard for us. Well, identify a few people you can text or call throughout the week just to remind them of their belonging. Maybe see Sunday gatherings as networking time. Use this time here to invite people over, make future plans. How about finally, when practicing hospitality, let's be considerate of other people's requirements, because we're all in different stages in this journey, and we have different upbringings and expectations of what that will look like, and we all interact differently during this pandemic. We can be considerate of other people's desires and requirements while seeking to show hospitality as well. I would love for us to see these as opportunities, not as requirements. We show hospitality because we have been shown hospitality. We search out the needy because we have been sought out. We're generous with our time, our money, our resources, because people have been generous with us, because God has been generous to us. Jesus showed us the ultimate act of hospitality when, in going to the cross, he provided a way to be a part of the family of God, to be adopted in and given belonging. COVID has actually gifted us more space. And hospitality requires space. So let's take this space-making gift to help others belong. Let's be proactive and not waiting for it to happen to us. We are the initiators. Hospitality does require vulnerability, and it does require stepping outside of our comfort zones. No getting around that. Hospitality also requires follow-up. It's not just a one and done. I want to close with just a story from the Old Testament. The prophet Elijah was going through a small town called Nain, and he ended up seeing a widow who had a small son, and she was picking up sticks to make her last meal, and she was anticipating that she and her son were going to die. And the prophet didn't notice, but he ended up going up to her and he said, "Hey, can you give me a meal and show hospitality toward me tonight?" And this woman basically is like, "This is it. This is my last meal, and I was going to, empty out the flour jar, and my son and I were going to die tomorrow." And instead, this man has the audacity to come in and start asking for something instead. But she ends up being hospitable. She invites this man into her home, and a miracle happens. Her flour, her oil do not run out. And God is able to gift her with something that was so beyond what she could do in her natural means. She thought she had this much to give. And it turns out, in an act of hospitality, God gave her an endless supply with which to take care of people. We all might feel like we have this much to give. We might feel like that widow in the small town of Nain who feel like, tomorrow I'm just going to die because I've got nothing left. And yet something beautiful happens when we decide to live a life in faith that is others-centered, towards showing others, you know what, this might cost me a bit, but I want you to know that you belong, that you are family. God honors that, and God shows up. I wrote out a benediction for us today. Becky, would you come up and we'll sing our doxology? I pray that as we fulfill this verse in Romans 12, that as we contribute to the needs of the saints and practice hospitality, that we would experience Jesus in everyone we reach out to, and we would see Jesus in the face of those who reach out to us. Amen. Let's stand and sing.
Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him wonderful thing we get to practice this week. And remember, don't stack the chairs in big stacks up here if you can. If you want to stack them